Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to start by saying that all the hard work has really been done already by the first three speakers, because obviously what I want to talk about is context, the role of context. And you can see by the title of the presentation that we're talking about context in the context of content. Content is king. We all know that. And context is the all-important factor, the amplification factor, if you like, that's so important for advertising. But the first three talks, I think, this morning have already done that much more articulately than I could do. So they've provided the context, or if you will, of the whole topic. And a huge thank you to Denise, Rufus, and Vanessa and the whole team. This has been a really fascinating project for us. We're looking at news brands generally, and we looked at automated trading, I suppose, in its most general sense, and we looked at how these things all interact and what kind of implications and what we call, if you like, unintended consequences have emerged. A lot of you will know who we are, but just in case for anyone who doesn't, so we are a research business in media generally. We publish on technology, we publish on marketing and advertising. Our real focus is on what I would call consumption and broader socioeconomic trends, if you like. And we're a good old-fashioned subscription business. We're a membership business, which is possibly worth mentioning in this room. And this is a list of some of our subscribers. We have about 170 subscribers altogether. So very briefly, what we did in terms of the project as we interviewed a bunch of people. So Millward Brown helped out, and we interviewed a bunch of agency people, very senior agency people, and brand directors or CMOs. And here is a list of who they are. Our main theme was to try and find out what they thought about stuff and if they thought differently about stuff. And I think what we found in the end was that both groups of people, we asked them the same bunch of questions, and of course this is not quantitative research because you can see with a number of people it was never going to lead to that. We asked them the same bunch of questions, and what we found is they did speak the same language, but there were quite significant discrepancies between the two stakeholders in how they thought about the marketplace as a whole. And indeed, the very word programmatic, which is a word that I sort of personally try to avoid because I think it can create all sorts of problems. Indeed, as one or two of these comments suggest, actually the language itself is in itself part of the problem. But what you do start to sense here is that brand owners, the CMOs, the marketing directors, have become more skeptical. They've grown in skepticism, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of how the market operates. They're worried about various elements of digital marketing, and while the agencies acknowledge some of the issues that the CMOs raise, in practice, they also try and explain them away. Perhaps I'm oversimplifying slightly, but you'll get a sense of it from this kind of summary slide. And this is the most important slide in our in this presentation and in this piece of research. On absolutely critical issues, the functioning of the market, the maturity of the market. This is digital trading generally. On very important technical issues such as viewability and fraud, and I will come back to those slightly later. Between what the CMOs themselves described as the gap between the promise of digital advertising and digital marketing and the practice of it, what's actually delivered in practice in terms of targeting and so on. They weren't saying fundamentally different things. Everybody that we interviewed totally got this marketplace. They totally understood this marketplace. Actually, they had quite a deep technical knowledge of it in many cases. But there is a big gap, I think, between what agencies would describe as teething problems and what CMOs might describe as fundamental obstacles. That is a very big gap indeed. A couple of quotes on marketplace practices. Again, just shine some light on what it is we were getting back. There's a few slides just with quotes included, which I just give you a kind of real flavour of real colour to what people were saying to us. A number of issues are coming to a head here. And clearly some actions are required. This is not something you can bury and just kind of hope it kind of goes away, or somehow it'll all just kind of work out if we don't really focus on it. We can't just ignore the level and depth and breadth of these discrepancies. And there's also a broader market reason for the timing of this research as commissioned by Newsworks, which we think of as just simply an important kind of milestone, if you like, in the advertising marketplace as a whole. So what is happening right now as we speak is that digital advertising in aggregate, in total, is overtaking entire, and forgive me, again, Rufus, we're going to refer to traditional media, but the aggregate of all advertising in TV and in print, in outdoor and radio and so on. This is a very important milestone, and that is what is happening right now in this country. But there's an element to it that is often overlooked, and that is that actually what's happened to date in terms of the growth of digital advertising is that the growth has been almost entirely, not entirely, almost entirely in what we call classified advertising, direct response advertising, search, those kind of things. So on the left-hand side, you can see that, that direct response advertising has, over a 15-year period, has grown by well over 50%. It's grown substantially. But of course, all of that growth and more is coming from digital. On the right-hand side, you can see the story of display advertising. And the main story there is a very simple one. It's flat. It's not gone up very much over a 15-year period. And actually, not an enormous amount of the display advertising marketplace belongs to digital. An awful lot of it still belongs to print, and an even greater amount of it still belongs to TV. So in the UK, display ads in digital are growing faster than anywhere in the world. And this is why this is such a critical question in terms of timing, but also it's a critical question right here in this country. It might not be overly surprising to you that the UK's display advertising marketplace is growing significantly faster than Germany or than France. It might be a surprise to you that it is also growing significantly faster than the United States. The UK is moving at a completely different pace, and we're becoming the test case for digital display advertising. More and more of this ad spend is being delivered by automated trading, by algorithm. Many brands are concerned there is no visibility for them of how their money is being spent. That was the message that was coming back again and again from the CMOs and brand directors that we spoke to. What we do know is that more than half of all digital display already is traded automatically through algorithms, and that is growing. Direct inventory selling is declining. In other words, all the negotiated direct stuff is falling away, and actually quite rapidly. And the pace of change is increasing. It's accelerating. We are moving further away from other territories, such as particularly in Europe, but also to some degree in the US. Now, you have to put this into kind of context. Let's kind of step back to thinking about the chief marketing officers and brand directors themselves. They are under immense pressure. To put this in very simplistic terms, the average CMO in this country, of a major business, the average CMO in this country lasts about 2 years. The average CEO lasts about 3 years. There is an argument that says the CMO is actually the person under most pressure in the boardrooms, certainly in the UK and perhaps in other territories as well. They are required to get more with less every year. Again, I exaggerate a little bit to make the point, but they're under tremendous budget pressure, and of course they're transferring a lot of that budget pressure to agencies. They entirely acknowledge that. They're required to provide evidence, often of a very simplistic kind, to chief executives, to finance directors, people who do not exist, or have knowledge of and expertise of, rather, of the marketing world. So in a sense, through fear or naivety or trust, over a period of time, over the last 3 years, they've really trusted what agencies have told them. They've really trusted the way agencies have advised them. But in a sense, in more recent times, over the last year, the message that we were getting from these CMOs is that the light bulb had come on, and they'd started to understood that they had not delivered on exactly the perfect path for their brand again and again. There are also enormous external pressures. How often do chief executives and finance directors tell brand directors, my family is on Facebook, shouldn't we be there too? Or, my daughter is using this website and that website, and so on and so forth. So there's a kind of combination of external pressures and internal pressures that is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on CMOs and how they behave. And they believe that they have transferred, there's a kind of growing sense that they've transferred a lot of the responsibility, decision-making responsibility, to agencies. And it's agencies themselves that are controlling this big dial, as it were. So in a sense, brands are turning up saying, my marketing objectives are broad, they're complex, they're very varied, some are short-term, some are long-term. But the marketing outputs going through the agency system is increasingly moving towards a very much a kind of direct response kind of methodology. Agencies are pushing more and more expenditure towards automated media, and which means the marketplace itself is becoming obsessed with a very limited set of metrics and measurements. But this chap, who we didn't interview, of course, does have a very, I think, astute point to make about, and he's someone who knew about measurement, clearly, astute point about how even measurement, even in the most kind of scientific kind of approach to life, has its limitations. Not everything can be measured precisely or at least usefully. And I think within the context of marketing, this is one of the kind of very serious questions that I think we need to ask around automated trading. Indeed, it's impossible to exaggerate how much things have changed. So let's just kind of think about how the world was and how the world has become. So the world was like this not so very long ago. Traditional media value measurement sat in this shape. In other words, awareness and interest of a brand was exactly where the value really sat. Brands and agencies paid big to reach big audiences. Further down the funnel is less valuable. The work of marketing, in a sense, has already been done once you get down to the conversion work. However, in automated trading, the whole model is effectively reversed. There's no value in a visit. There's no value, really, in reaching an audience, because anyone can deliver an audience, and no one's going to beat Facebook in doing so. What matters is conversion. What matters is the response. What matters is the very immediate, short-term data point that we can record right at the end of our nose, as it were, rather than some of the longer-term objectives that we showed just 2 or 3 slides ago. Yet this model does not reflect the experiences of the brand directors, who deal with a myriad of challenges every day. And again, I give you a couple of quotes. To be clear, and as I said right at the front, there's no great plan here, I don't think, that is a kind of, Dr. Evil, as it were, pulling the strings. What there is, though, arguably, I think, is a series of unintended consequences of the transition to digital. And I often think of it as this vicious circle. It was sort of articulated by 1 or 2 of the brand directors that we spoke to. They may not have drawn this exactly as shown, but they sort of hinted at this kind of issue. So there's a vicious circle spun by automated trading, at least from the point of view of those long-term marketing techniques. CMOs are worried that context and environment are ignored, and the mindset of the consumer with different media is not taken into account. So we often talk about, or often hear about, brands, media, and so on being able to reach different audiences. I think actually the really critical question is how it is that audiences, individuals, every single person in this room, actually is a different person in different circumstances. You're not the same person on a newspaper website as you are when you're on Facebook or on Twitter or something of that nature. Simultaneously, consumers and indeed marketeers are becoming alarmed at the amount of tracking that is taking place across the web generally. And brands and media are concerned about these consequences. Is the incentive to invest in content in order to create attractive advertising, to create an attractive advertising platform itself being undermined? Again, not intentionally, almost by accident. But surely businesses, we can see that businesses that curate, that aggregate, are just much more efficient at doing this stuff. They're much better at growing enormous amounts of traffic. So therefore, they're going to win. They're bound to win. But what about context itself? The marketing directors have come back to this. They feel, again, I exaggerate a little bit for effect, but they feel like, oh my God, we weren't focused enough on this. We weren't focused enough on this issue. It's the context that has become absolutely key. Let's now look at one or two examples that prove the point. One is a study by AOP, which demonstrates unambiguously that original content sites are more effective than either portals or social networks in terms of communication, brand advocacy, active engagement with the consumers, direct contact. An incredibly simplistic example, comparing the expenditure value, if you like, of TV and YouTube. This is based on US revenue per hour data. And you could be forgiven for thinking, I think if you read lots of media studies, you could be forgiven for thinking that actually this chart is drawn the wrong way around. YouTube is surely much better targeting. Its segmentation is superb. Its granular data reporting excellent. Its audience has chosen to be there, so they're very much part of pull media rather than push media. YouTube has to be winning, right? But actually what's happening, of course, right now today is the exact opposite of that because of context. In other words, brand after brand after brand recognizes that TV is just a better place to be. But if brands recognize this on TV, why are they not recognizing it quite as much as you would expect, at least in some content areas, and print media in particular may be suffering in this sense? Newswork's own study, the company you keep. Now, I'm not going to be the right person to articulate this in great depth, but the simple message here, I think, is an incredibly powerful one. So a group of consumers were given, some who were news readers, news brand readers, and some who were not, were given a series of reading tasks. And the important thing of this study was the implicit nature of it. So in effect, what was happening is that consumers were relating to brands and thinking about brands in ways that they perhaps even weren't entirely aware themselves. And guess what? When you compare the readers of brands with non-readers, the readers enormously outperform in terms of how close they are to the brands, how they think about the brands. They're much more likely to interact, to recommend, and to purchase, or at least have an intention, if you like, to purchase. And this is not just a kind of print versus digital point. Look at that consideration figure for the tablet, up 38%. For those readers, showing just how much more powerful advertising is in the right environment. I talked at the beginning about a couple of huge obstacles, what I thought of as, or described as technical obstacles, if you like, viewability and non-human traffic. These are huge issues, I think, for the industry, and they're getting bigger. They're not going away. The reality is that most ads simply are not seen. I mean, this is a huge problem. And there's an insane definition, I think, of seen, just at the bottom of that blue box. Seen is defined as half of pixels visible for one, and this is the killer word, continuous second. As if somehow, there's non-continuous seconds that we need to be worried about as well. And non-human traffic is, in other words, robots going on to sites, is a huge problem. An enormous proportion of traffic is in effect coming from robots, not coming from real people. And another study by Bloomberg Businessweek just last week shows exactly the same, reflects exactly the same kind of level of data issues. So there's lots of issues that need to be addressed. These are more technical issues, but these issues clearly do need to be addressed in this kind of broader kind of question. Summing up, CMOs do not believe that automated delivers on its promise, at least not unambiguously and not perfectly every time. There's a feeling of being kind of hoodwinked by a process that is very opaque to them, if you like. CMOs also feel quite trapped by a really immense external and internal pressures from the outside world, pressures also from inside their organization and from the whole supply chain, the agency model and so on. And the unintended and perverse incentives are evolving in the marketplace, not in some designed way, but almost by accident, to such a stage that distribution, to such an extent that distribution is now becoming more important than the content itself. And I hope the speakers this morning remind you of just how important that whole kind of question is. So what happens next? My final slide. What happens next? I think it is critical that very open and frank discussions take place between all three parties. And all three parties indeed are in this room, I guess, just now. Brands themselves, agencies, and of course media, newspaper companies, and also other content companies. This is hardly a unique set of problems for news brands. That new reach metrics are reached across all platforms, and I know that is now clearly, as described by both Rufus and Denise this morning, clearly there is now progress in this, and there's now a path for us to kind of get there. There's a new engagement study looking at audience attention, looking at trust, looking at engagement. These are critical things. I think of it as the amplification effect, the really kind of important factor that when I'm on a newspaper site, I'm a different person. I behave differently. I respond differently from when I'm on Facebook. And ultimately, I think what would be really exciting is to find a way to quantify that amplification, and indeed the ultimate thing is to be able to trade on that amplification at some point. And that is what I hope ultimately Shift next year starts to address. And with that, I will leave you. Thank you.